He invited his poor ex-wife to humiliate her at a prestigious gala, but she arrived in a black limo and destroyed his arrogance in front of everyone who mattered. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome home to Infidelity Stories. If no one has reminded you today, let me be the one. You are stronger than you know. You are worthy of every good thing. You are deeply, deeply valued. I don't speak to a crowd. I speak to hearts. Your heart. And if mine still lives inside yours, please comment, I am here. And like this video. Not because I told you to, but because it makes me feel your presence. When you do that without me asking, I feel so proud. I feel seen. I feel held. You are the soul of this channel. Every time I hit record, I think of you, your resilience, your courage, your quiet strength. I don't just tell stories, I write them with the love I have for you. And I promise, no one in this world could ever champion your comeback the way I do. Now receive this prayer from me like armor for your battles. May your days be filled with moments that remind you of your power. May your struggles transform into stepping stones, your pain into purpose, and your setbacks into comebacks. May every person who underestimated you witness your rise, and may you walk into every room knowing you belong there, not because someone gave you permission, but because you earned it. May vindication find you when you least expect it. And may love, real love, meet you where you are. Let's begin. Hand in hand, heart to heart. One family, one love forever. The embossed invitation trembled in Christine Klein's hands as she stared at the gold lettering that would change everything. After 10 years of silence and a decade of building herself from nothing, Philip Bennett had reached out. Her ex-husband. The man who had abandoned her when she was pregnant and penniless. The billionaire who had told her she would never amount to anything. And now he wanted her at his charity gala. Her heart didn't race with joy. It pounded with recognition. She knew exactly what this invitation meant. Christine had planned her response with meticulous care. She'd booked the sleekest black limousine in the city, the kind that turned heads on Park Avenue. Her gown hung in her walk-in closet, a stunning midnight blue Valentino that had cost more than Philip used to make in a month when they'd first met. Her stylist was scheduled to arrive at 6, and her assistant had confirmed every detail 3 times. She'd even practiced her entrance in heels that cost what her old apartment's monthly rent used to be. At 36, Christine still remembered the girl she'd been when she'd met Philip Bennett 12 years ago. She'd been a waitress at an upscale restaurant, working double shifts to afford community college classes. He was the most powerful man who'd ever looked at her twice. Ivy League educated, heir to a real estate empire, and impossibly handsome in his custom suits. Their courtship had felt like being chosen. Expensive dinners she couldn't pronounce, weekend trips to places she'd only seen in magazines, and a proposal that had made her believe fairy tales were real. But fairy tales don't prepare you for the moment your prince becomes your villain. Tonight, she would walk into that ballroom, and Philip would see exactly what he'd lost. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. She was no longer the desperate woman he'd discarded. She was the CEO he never believed she could become. The notification on her phone made her pulse quicken with anticipation. Her driver had arrived. Christine picked up her clutch, glancing one last time at the invitation lying on her marble countertop. She could picture Philip now, standing in that grand ballroom surrounded by his wealthy peers, checking his Rolex, waiting for her to arrive humbled and defeated. But the woman who would walk through those doors tonight wasn't the one he remembered. Christine Klein had transformed herself, and tonight, she would show him and everyone else exactly how wrong he'd been. She smoothed the fabric of her gown and headed toward the elevator, her Jimmy Choos clicking against the polished floor with a sound that seemed to echo with purpose. The charity gala started in 45 minutes. Philip expected her to arrive late, awkward, out of place. What he didn't expect was what she'd become. The elevator doors opened to the lobby of her penthouse building, and Christine could see the black limousine waiting through the glass doors. The driver stood beside it, ready to open her door. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for since the invitation arrived 3 weeks ago. But as she stepped toward the car, she allowed herself one final memory of who she used to be. The woman Philip had left behind. The woman who had cried herself to sleep in a studio apartment with peeling wallpaper. The woman who had sworn, through tears and fury, that she would never let anyone make her feel small again. That woman had died the day Philip walked out, and in her place rose someone he would never recognize, someone he would never forget. The leather seat of the limousine felt impossibly soft beneath her, but Christine Klein could still remember the worn fabric of the bus seats she used to collapse into after 16-hour workdays. 10 years ago, luxury like this would have been unimaginable. 10 years ago, she was barely surviving. The divorce papers had arrived on a Tuesday. Philip's lawyer delivered them to the dingy studio apartment she'd moved into after he kicked her out. She was 3 months pregnant, working as a cashier at a drugstore during the day, and cleaning office buildings at night. Her hands were raw from bleach, her feet ached constantly, and she survived on ramen noodles and whatever expired sandwiches her manager let her take home. Philip had left her with nothing. Not the apartment they'd shared, not the car, not even the furniture she'd picked out. Just debt and a baby on the way. She'd worked through her entire pregnancy. Morning sickness didn't stop for shift work. Neither did exhaustion or swollen ankles. She'd hauled trash bags down hallways at 2 in the morning. Her belly growing larger each week, tears streaming down her face because she couldn't afford prenatal vitamins without skipping meals. The baby came early. A son. Beautiful and perfect and terrifying because she had no idea how she was going to provide for him. She'd taken exactly 5 days off work before strapping him to her chest and returning to her cleaning shifts, praying he wouldn't cry and get her fired. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was 11 at night. She'd just gotten home from her evening shift, had finally gotten the baby to sleep, and was heating up leftover rice when her phone rang. Philip's name flashed on the screen. Her heart had lurched with something she hated to admit was hope. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he wanted to meet his son. Maybe there was still a chance at the life she'd dreamed of. Christine. His voice was casual, almost cheerful. I wanted to let you know I'm getting married. To someone who actually fits into my world. I thought you should hear it from me before you saw it in the papers. The words hit her like physical blows. She'd gripped the counter to stay standing. We're expecting 2. He'd continued, oblivious or uncaring about the devastation he was causing. A proper family this time. Anyway, I just wanted to clear the air. No hard feelings, right? She'd hung up without responding. Then she'd walked to the bathroom, looked at herself in the cracked mirror above the sink, and made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She was done being the woman Philip had discarded, done being poor, powerless, and pitied, done letting anyone make her feel worthless. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took years of sacrifice that made her previous struggles look easy. She'd enrolled in online business courses, studying after her son fell asleep. Coffee her only companion through 3 a.m. study sessions. She'd saved every penny, cutting expenses so ruthlessly she wore the same 3 outfits for 2 years straight. Her first business venture was small. A consulting service helping small businesses with their social media marketing. She'd taught herself everything through free YouTube videos and library books, practicing on her own accounts until she understood every algorithm, every engagement strategy, every conversion technique. The first client paid her $200. She'd cried when the payment cleared. Within a year, she had 15 clients. Within 2, she'd hired her first employee. By year 3, she'd expanded into full digital marketing services and moved out of that studio apartment into a modest 2-bedroom. Philip never knew, never checked, never cared. That indifference fueled her more than hatred ever could. Every contract she signed, every client she impressed, every milestone she reached was proof that he'd been wrong about her. She wasn't the nobody he'd married out of pity. She was capable of building an empire he could only dream of. She'd rebranded 5 years ago, launching Klein Digital Solutions with a focus on luxury brands. The irony wasn't lost on her that the companies Philip's friends owned were now paying her firm 6 figures for marketing campaigns. She'd sit in boardrooms with men who'd attended his wedding, who'd probably heard him describe her as his mistake, and they had no idea she was that woman. They only knew her as the brilliant strategist who'd tripled their revenue. Last year, her company grossed $8 million. This year, they were projected to hit $12 million. The limousine slowed, and Christine realized they were approaching the venue. Through the tinted windows, she could see the Grand Hotel lit up like a palace, luxury cars lining the circular driveway, photographers positioned to capture arrivals. Philip's world. The world he'd told her she'd never belong to. She checked her reflection one final time in the compact mirror. Perfect, Powerful. Unbreakable. The girl who'd cried on bus rides home was gone. In her place sat a woman who'd built herself from ruins into something extraordinary. And tonight, Philip Bennett would finally see exactly what he'd thrown away. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a private courier to her downtown office. Christine had been in the middle of a strategy meeting with her senior team when her assistant knocked and handed her the cream-colored envelope, apologizing for the interruption but noting it had been marked urgent and personal. She'd recognized the handwriting immediately. Elegant, precise letter forms in black ink, Philip's signature style. The one he'd learned at that expensive prep school he never stopped mentioning. Her stomach had dropped. 10 years. 10 years of absolute silence. Not a phone call. Not an email. Not even a curiosity-driven social media search that she would have been notified about. He'd erased her from his life so completely that she'd sometimes wondered if their marriage had been real at all or just some fever dream she'd imagined while working herself to exhaustion. She'd excused herself from the meeting, walked to her private office, closed the door, and stared at that envelope for a full 5 minutes before opening it. The invitation itself was obscenely expensive. Embossed gold lettering on heavyweight cardstock announced the annual Bennett Foundation Charity Gala, benefiting underprivileged youth in the arts. The irony nearly made her laugh. Philip Bennett, champion of the less fortunate. The same man who told her she was too poor to understand his world, now pretended to care about poverty, but it was the handwritten note tucked inside that had stolen her breath. Christine, I hope this finds you well. It would mean a great deal to have you attend. I believe it's time we put the past behind us. Looking forward to seeing you. Warmly, Philip, warmly, as if they were old friends catching up after a pleasant separation, instead of a man who'd abandoned his pregnant wife and never looked back. She'd felt the rage first, hot and immediate, flooding through her veins like poison. How dare he? How dare he reach out after all this time with some casual pleasantry as though he hadn't destroyed her life? As though those years of struggle and humiliation had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience they could now laugh about over champagne. Then came the suspicion. Philip Bennett never did anything without a motive. Every action was calculated, every gesture strategic. This wasn't an olive branch. This was something else entirely. She'd spent the next hour researching his recent activities. Social media posts showed him and his wife at various society events, always photographed with the right people, always dressed immaculately. His business had expanded significantly. His foundation had become one of the city's most prominent charitable organizations. He'd cultivated an image of sophistication and generosity that probably made people forget he'd once been ruthless enough to discard a pregnant woman like garbage. That's when she understood. He wanted her there to complete his redemption narrative. Look how magnanimous he was, inviting his poor ex-wife to his gala. Look how he'd risen above their unfortunate past. She would arrive humble and grateful, a testament to his character growth, proof that he harbored no ill will toward those beneath his station. He expected her to show up defeated, a reminder to everyone in that ballroom of how far he'd come and how generous he was to acknowledge where he'd been. The presumption had taken her breath away. Her first instinct was to burn the invitation, send nothing back, let him wonder. Let him wait for a response that would never come. Denying him even the satisfaction of her refusal felt like the ultimate power move. But as the days passed, something shifted inside her. She'd catch herself staring at that cream cardstock on her desk, reading his words over and over. Looking forward to seeing you. Was he? Really? Or was he looking forward to seeing the version of her that existed in his memory? The broken woman who'd begged him not to leave. The desperate single mother who'd cried into cheap pillows in that studio apartment. The failure he'd predicted she would always be. He had no idea who she'd become. None whatsoever. She'd built an empire he couldn't imagine. Commanded respect from people in his own social circle who paid her firm more money than he'd ever given her in their entire marriage. She'd transformed herself so completely that the Christine Klein he remembered no longer existed anywhere except in his outdated assumptions. That realization had changed everything. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge required caring about his opinion. And she'd stopped caring years ago when she'd realized his validation was worthless. This was about something far more important. This was about proving to herself that she'd truly moved beyond him, that she could walk into his world not as someone seeking approval or vindication, but as someone who belonged there on her own merit. Someone who'd earned every single thing she had through talent and determination and refusal to quit. She'd made the decision on a quiet Sunday evening, sitting in her penthouse apartment overlooking the city skyline. Her son was away at boarding school, the best education money could buy. Something she'd earned for him through her own success. She'd poured herself a glass of wine, picked up her phone, and RSVP'd yes to the gala. Not because Philip deserved her presence, but because she deserved to walk into that room knowing she'd conquered everything he'd said was impossible. Christine stood in her walk-in closet the evening before the gala, surveying a collection of designer gowns that would have made her 26-year-old self weep. Valentino, Versace, Dior, each one a testament to how far she'd climbed from those studio apartment days when she'd owned exactly 2 professional outfits purchased from clearance racks. Her fingers traced the midnight blue Valentino, the fabric impossibly soft beneath her touch. This dress cost more than 3 months of rent at that old apartment. The thought should have felt surreal, but it didn't. She'd earned every thread of that silk through late nights, sacrificed weekends, and an unshakable refusal to accept limitation. Klein Digital Solutions now occupied an entire floor of a downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 43 employees depended on her for their livelihoods. Last quarter alone, her company had secured contracts worth over $3 million. Fortune 500 companies sought her expertise. Marketing directors who'd never given her a second glance now waited weeks for consultation appointments. She'd built something extraordinary. Not inherited, not married into. Built with her own vision and relentless execution. Her phone buzzed with a text from Melissa Rodriguez, her chief marketing officer and closest friend. "Ready for tomorrow night? You're going to destroy him without saying a word." Christine smiled. Melissa had been one of her first hires, back when Klein Digital Solutions operated out of Christine's second bedroom, and office meetings meant sitting cross-legged on the floor with laptops and coffee. They'd grown together, built this empire side by side through countless 18-hour days and strategy sessions that lasted until dawn. Now Melissa drove a Tesla and lived in a penthouse 3 blocks away. Her success was Christine's success. Proof that she'd created opportunities not just for herself but for talented women who deserved better than corporate glass ceilings and condescending executives. Christine texted back, "Not about destroying anyone. About showing up as myself." But even as she sent it, she felt the flutter of anticipation in her chest. Tomorrow night, she would walk into Philip's carefully constructed world and shatter every assumption he'd ever made about her. She'd spent the afternoon finalizing details. The limousine service confirmed for 7:30 pickup. The sleek black car that would deliver her to the hotel entrance exactly when she wanted to arrive. Not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to appear desperate for attention. Perfectly timed for maximum impact. Her hairstylist would arrive at 5 to create an elegant updo that would photograph beautifully. Her makeup artist at 6 for a look that said, effortlessly sophisticated, while requiring 2 hours of expert application. Every detail orchestrated with the same precision she brought to million-dollar marketing campaigns. This was her life now. Personal stylists, luxury services, the kind of effortless elegance that required significant effort and resources to achieve. She'd learned the rules of Philip's world and mastered them better than he ever had. Her reflection in the full-length mirror showed a woman who belonged in boardrooms and ballrooms. Fitness training 3 times weekly had kept her strong and healthy. Regular spa treatments maintained skin that glowed with care rather than exhaustion. Her hair, once pulled into a perpetual ponytail from sheer time poverty, now fell in glossy waves that spoke of expensive salon treatments. But the real transformation was invisible. It lived in the way she held herself, the confidence that radiated from knowing she'd conquered impossible odds. She no longer sought validation from anyone, not clients, not competitors, certainly not ex-husbands who'd discarded her like yesterday's trash. She'd proven Philip spectacularly wrong, not just survived, but thrived beyond anything he'd predicted, built a business that generated more annual revenue than most people earned in a lifetime, created a name for herself that commanded respect in rooms where he'd once told her she'd never belong. The sacrifices had been brutal. Years without vacations, relationships that withered because she had no time to nurture them. Missing school events because client emergencies didn't respect parenting schedules. Her son, now thriving at an elite boarding school, had witnessed her struggle and her triumph. He'd learned that success required sacrifice, that transformation demanded everything you had, and then some. But standing in this closet, surrounded by tangible evidence of her achievements, Christine felt something deeper than pride. She felt free. Free from the shame Philip had tried to make her wear. Free from the poverty that had once defined every decision. Free from needing anyone's permission to claim the life she'd built. Tomorrow night wasn't about revenge. Revenge implied he still had power over her emotions. And he didn't. This was about closure. About walking into that gala as the woman she'd become, and leaving behind any remaining ghost of the woman she'd been. She pulled the midnight blue Valentino from the rack. Perfect. Elegant without trying too hard. Sophisticated without screaming for attention. The dress of a woman who had nothing to prove because her success spoke louder than any outfit ever could. Her phone buzzed again. The car service confirming tomorrow's pickup time. Christine responded with a quick confirmation, then set the phone down and took one last look around her closet. 10 years ago, Philip Bennett had thrown her away like she was nothing. Tomorrow, she would show him exactly what nothing had become. The grand ballroom at the Meridian Hotel had been transformed into a vision of calculated extravagance. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the vaulted ceiling, each one worth more than most people's annual salary. White orchids imported from Thailand cascaded from centerpieces on tables draped in champagne silk. A 12-piece orchestra played softly near the marble dance floor, their music barely audible over the refined murmur of conversations worth millions. Philip Bennett stood near the bar, scotch in hand, surveying his creation with barely concealed satisfaction. Everything was perfect. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's elite: business magnates, politicians, society wives dripping in diamonds, and celebrities whose presence alone guaranteed media coverage. The Bennett Foundation's annual charity gala had become the event of the season, the invitation everyone wanted, the party that defined social hierarchy. And tonight, it would serve an additional purpose. He checked his Patek Philippe for the third time in 10 minutes. 8:15. Christine should be arriving soon. He'd deliberately suggested 8 o'clock on her invitation, knowing the main program started at 7:30. She would walk in late, after everyone had already arrived, after the cocktail hour had established the evening's tone of wealth and sophistication. "Darling, you seem distracted." His wife, Natasha, appeared at his elbow, stunning in a silver Elie Saab gown that had required 3 fittings. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection, her neck adorned with the sapphire necklace he'd given her for their 5th anniversary. Everything about her screamed old money, proper breeding, the right kind of woman for a man of his stature. "Just making sure everything runs smoothly," Philip replied, forcing a smile. He couldn't tell Natasha the real reason for his anticipation, couldn't explain that he'd invited his destitute ex-wife specifically to remind himself how far he'd come. Natasha squeezed his arm and glided away to chat with the mayor's wife, leaving Philip alone with his thoughts and his scotch. The evening was proceeding exactly as planned. Donations were already rolling in from the silent auction. His speech about underprivileged youth had been met with enthusiastic applause and several pledges of 6-figure contributions. Photographers from 3 different society magazines circulated through the crowd, capturing images that would cement his reputation as a philanthropist and community leader. But the true triumph of the evening was yet to come. Philip imagined Christine walking through those double doors in whatever discount department store dress she could afford. Her hair probably still styled the way she used to wear it, simple and unfashionable. She would scan the room with wide eyes, overwhelmed by the opulence, painfully aware of how much she didn't belong, and everyone would see her. Everyone would understand the contrast between his past mistake and his current success. He'd rehearsed his greeting, warm but not too familiar, gracious enough to make him look magnanimous. "Christine, so glad you could make it. You look well." Simple, elegant, the kind of statement that acknowledged her presence without elevating her importance. "Bennett, hell of a party," boomed Richard Hartford, CEO of Hartford Industries and one of Philip's most valuable business connections. That ice sculpture alone must have cost a fortune, only the best for a worthy cause. Philip responded smoothly, clinking glasses with Hartford. But his eyes remained fixed on the ballroom entrance. The truth was, he needed this. Needed to see Christine diminished in his world, to fully erase the guilt that occasionally surfaced late at night when Natasha was asleep and the house was quiet. The guilt that whispered he'd been cruel. That abandoning a pregnant woman was the act of a coward, not a man making a smart decision about his future. But seeing her tonight, seeing her struggle to fit in, would silence that voice forever. She would be living proof that he'd been right to leave, that she'd never been worthy of the life he'd built, that some people were simply meant to remain in the background while others like him ascended to greatness. 8:20. Where was she? A ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd near the entrance, heads turning, conversations pausing mid-sentence. Philip straightened, heart rate quickening. This was it. The moment he'd been orchestrating for 3 weeks. The massive double doors opened, and every eye in the ballroom turned to see who had arrived. Christine Klein stepped through the double doors like she owned the building, and in that moment, she might as well have. The midnight blue Valentino gown flowed around her like liquid sapphire, the silk catching the light from the crystal chandeliers with every movement. The dress featured a subtle off-the-shoulder neckline that revealed elegant collarbones and shoulders sculpted by years of disciplined fitness routines. The fitted bodice accentuated a figure maintained not through desperation but through the luxury of personal trainers and nutritionists. The skirt fell in graceful lines to the floor, with a tasteful slit that revealed designer heels worth more than Philip's monthly car payment. But it wasn't the dress that stopped conversations mid-sentence. It was her. Her hair had been styled in an elegant updo that showcased the graceful line of her neck, with a few artfully placed tendrils framing a face that radiated confidence rather than cosmetics. Diamond earrings caught the light, simple but clearly real, the kind of jewelry that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. Her makeup was flawless, emphasizing features that had matured from pretty to striking, from girl to woman, from victim to victor. She paused in the doorway just long enough for every eye in the ballroom to find her, then moved forward with the kind of effortless grace that only comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. The crowd parted instinctively as she walked, creating a path through the ballroom like the Red Sea recognizing Moses. Conversations died. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the orchestra seemed to play softer, as though the musicians sensed they were witnessing a moment that demanded attention. Philip felt his carefully constructed confidence shatter like dropped crystal. This couldn't be Christine. This woman gliding across the marble floor with the poise of someone born to ballrooms and galas couldn't possibly be the desperate, crying girl he'd left behind. The broken woman who'd begged him not to leave. The failure he'd predicted she would always be. But it was her. Those eyes, darker and more knowing now but unmistakably hers, locked onto his from across the room. And in that gaze, Philip saw everything he'd lost and everything he'd underestimated compressed into one devastating moment of recognition. His scotch glass trembled in his hand. The witty greeting he'd rehearsed evaporated from his mind like water on hot pavement. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Christine moved toward him with purpose, each step measured and deliberate. She didn't hurry, didn't hesitate. She walked like someone who had every right to be here, who belonged in this world of privilege and power, who had earned her place through something far more valuable than inheritance or marriage. My God, who is that? Philip heard Natasha whisper to someone nearby, her voice tinged with curiosity, and something that might have been envy. I have no idea. But that dress is Valentino. Another woman responded. Spring collection. Costs more than my car. Richard Hartford materialized at Philip's elbow, letting out a low whistle of appreciation. Bennett, please tell me you're going to introduce us to whoever that is. She's absolutely stunning. Philip couldn't respond. His throat had closed. His carefully orchestrated evening, his moment of triumph, his opportunity to showcase his success against her failure, was imploding in real time. Because Christine Klein wasn't failing. She was conquering. She reached him, stopping just close enough that they could speak privately but far enough away that she maintained the power position. Up close, she was even more devastating. Her skin glowed with health and expensive skincare. Her posture spoke of yoga classes and confidence coaching. Everything about her screamed success, sophistication, and strength. Philip, her voice was smooth as silk and twice as expensive. No tremor of nervousness, no hint of the desperate woman he remembered. Just cool, composed acknowledgement of his existence. Christine. He finally found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. You look. He trailed off, unable to find words that didn't sound like admission of defeat. Different? She supplied, one perfectly shaped eyebrow arching slightly. 10 years will do that. Thank you so much for the invitation. Her smile was polite, professional, the kind you'd give a business acquaintance, not an ex-husband who'd destroyed your life. The crowd around them had stopped pretending not to stare. Philip could feel dozens of eyes watching this interaction, could sense the curiosity rippling through his guests like electricity through water. He'd wanted them to see Christine, wanted them to witness his triumph over his past mistakes. But the woman standing before him wasn't a mistake. She was a masterpiece, and everyone in the room knew it. Christine extended her hand for a handshake, the gesture so casual and professional that it forced Philip to respond on her terms. His palm was clammy when it met hers. Her grip was firm, controlled, the handshake of someone accustomed to closing million-dollar deals. "I believe you wanted to say something to me," she said, her voice carrying just far enough that nearby guests could hear. "Or perhaps you'd prefer I address your guests directly. After all, I'm sure they're curious about who I am." Philip's face drained of color. "Christine, that's not necessary," but she'd already turned toward the crowd, her poise commanding attention more effectively than any microphone could. The conversations that had resumed after her entrance died again. Even the orchestra seemed to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary, letting their instruments fall silent. "Good evening, everyone." Christine's voice was warm, confident, the tone of someone comfortable speaking to rooms full of powerful people. "I apologize for interrupting this beautiful event. My name is Christine Klein, and Philip was kind enough to invite me tonight." She paused, letting that information settle. "You see, Philip and I have history. We were married once, about 12 years ago." A collective intake of breath rippled through the ballroom. Natasha's head snapped toward her husband, confusion and something darker flashing across her features. Philip stood frozen, a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in slow motion. "Back then, I was nobody," Christine continued, her words measured and deliberate. "A waitress working double shifts, barely making rent, completely out of my depth when this successful, sophisticated man decided I was worth his attention. I thought I'd won the lottery." Her smile was bittersweet. "Turns out I'd just bought a ticket to the hardest lesson of my life." She wasn't speaking with anger or bitterness. Her tone was almost conversational, like she was sharing an interesting anecdote over cocktails, but every word landed with precision, each sentence building a narrative that held the room captive. "When I got pregnant, Philip decided I no longer fit his vision for his future. So he left, filed for divorce, made sure I understood that I was temporary, disposable, not good enough for the life he was building." She gestured around the opulent ballroom. "This life." Specifically, Philip found his voice, though it came out strangled. "Christine, please, I'm not here for revenge." "Philip," she said, turning back to him with eyes that showed nothing but truth. "I'm here because you invited me, remember? You wanted me to see all of this, and I appreciate that, because standing here tonight, I finally understand something important." She turned back to the crowd, and her presence seemed to fill every corner of the massive ballroom. "After he left, I was homeless within 3 months, working as a cashier and cleaning office buildings at night while pregnant. I survived on ramen noodles and expired sandwiches. I gave birth to my son and went back to work 5 days later because I couldn't afford not to." The room was utterly silent. Even the servers had stopped moving, frozen with champagne trays mid-delivery. "But here's what Philip never understood about poverty," Christine continued, her voice strengthening with each word. "It either destroys you, or it forges you into something unbreakable. And I refused to be destroyed." She walked slowly as she spoke, commanding the space like she'd been born to it. "I taught myself digital marketing through library books and YouTube videos, started my first business with a $200 investment, worked 18-hour days for years while raising my son alone, built Klein Digital Solutions from absolutely nothing into one of the most successful marketing firms in this city." Recognition dawned on several faces in the crowd. Richard Hartford's mouth dropped open. "You're that Klein? Klein Digital Solutions?" Christine nodded. Last year we grossed $8 million in revenue. This year we're projected to hit $12 million. Several of you in this room are actually my clients, though we've never met in person." She smiled. "Your companies pay my firm 6 figures for marketing strategies that triple your revenue." The power shift in the room was palpable. What had begun as Philip's triumphant gala had become Christine's stage, and she owned every second of it. "So thank you, Philip," she said, turning back to her ex-husband one final time. "Thank you for abandoning me. Thank you for telling me I'd never amount to anything. Thank you for showing me that the only person I could ever truly depend on was myself. You gave me the greatest gift possible. You taught me exactly how strong I could become." The silence that followed was deafening. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then joined by others, until half the ballroom was applauding. Not for Philip or his charity or his foundation, for Christine, for the woman who'd risen from nothing and conquered everything. Philip stood alone in the center of his own gala, invisible while his ex-wife received the recognition he'd spent the entire evening seeking. The applause finally faded, but the damage was permanent. Philip stood frozen in place, watching his carefully orchestrated evening disintegrate around him. The guests who'd arrived to celebrate his philanthropy and success were now clustering around Christine like moths to a flame, their interest in him evaporating as though he'd never existed. Richard Hartford was the first to approach her, extending his hand with genuine enthusiasm. "Miss Klein, I had no idea you were the genius behind our last campaign. The results were phenomenal. I've been meaning to schedule a meeting to discuss expanding our contract." "I'd be delighted," Christine replied smoothly, her smile warm but professional. "Have your assistant reach out to my office. We have some innovative strategies I think would be perfect for your Q1 launch." Others followed. The CEO of a luxury hotel chain, the founder of a tech startup, even the mayor's wife, who'd spent the first hour of the evening glued to Philip's side, now stood captivated by Christine's description of her company's community outreach programs. Natasha appeared at Philip's elbow, her face a carefully constructed mask of composure that didn't quite hide the fury beneath. "Your ex-wife," she said through clenched teeth, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "You invited your ex-wife to humiliate me? To make me look like a fool in front of everyone we know? That wasn't she was supposed to." Philip stammered, but the words died in his throat. How could he explain that Christine wasn't supposed to look like that, wasn't supposed to be successful, wasn't supposed to transform his moment of triumph into his greatest humiliation? "We're leaving," Natasha announced, already turning toward the exit. "And when we get home, we're going to have a very long conversation about honesty in this marriage." Philip watched his wife's silver gown disappear into the crowd, another piece of his carefully constructed life crumbling. But he couldn't move, couldn't stop watching Christine work the room with the kind of effortless grace he'd spent years trying to cultivate and never quite mastered. She wasn't gloating, wasn't reveling in his defeat. She was simply being herself, brilliant and confident and entirely comfortable in a world he'd told her she'd never belong to. That somehow made it worse. If she'd been vindictive or cruel, he could have dismissed her as bitter. But she wasn't bitter. She was beyond him entirely, operating on a level he couldn't reach. The orchestra had resumed playing, but the energy of the room had shifted irrevocably. What should have been Philip's crowning achievement, the gala that cemented his reputation as a philanthropist and leader, had become the night Christine Klein proved she'd risen from poverty to surpass everyone in the room. Conversations he'd planned for, connections he'd intended to make, all evaporated as his guests gravitated toward Christine. They wanted to know about her company, her journey, her success. Nobody asked about the Bennett Foundation or his real estate developments or his plans for expansion. He'd become invisible at his own event. Philip retreated to the bar, ordering another scotch with hands that trembled slightly. From this vantage point, he could see Christine surrounded by admirers, her midnight blue gown catching the light every time she moved. She looked like she belonged there, because she did. She'd earned it. The realization hit him with physical force. He'd married her when she was nobody, because it made him feel powerful to elevate someone so far beneath him. He'd abandoned her when she became inconvenient because he'd assumed she'd remain beneath him forever. A footnote in his rise to greatness. But she hadn't remained beneath him. She'd climbed higher than he could imagine. built something more impressive than his inherited wealth and family connections could ever create. While he'd been coasting on his last name and prep school connections, she'd been fighting, building, transforming herself into something extraordinary, and he'd missed it. Missed knowing her. Missed watching their son grow up. Missed the partnership with someone who clearly possessed more strength and vision than he'd ever recognized. The weight of that loss settled on him like lead. Christine checked her phone, said something gracious to the people surrounding her, and began moving toward the exit. Not rushed. Not fleeing. Simply leaving. Her purpose accomplished. As she passed Philip's position at the bar, their eyes met one final time. She didn't smile triumphantly or say anything cutting. She simply nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement between two people whose lives had once been intertwined and now never would be again. Then she was gone, disappearing through the double doors with the same grace she'd entered with, leaving behind a room full of people who would remember this night not for Philip Bennett's charity work, but for the moment they witnessed a woman who'd transformed defeat into destiny. Philip ordered another scotch and looked around his beautiful, expensive gala. He'd gotten exactly what he wanted. He'd brought Christine into his world. He just hadn't anticipated she'd own it completely. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.